Footprints in the Snow, A Christmas Story by D.E. Ladd, read by Hannah Wachter. Colorful candy-like Christmas lights swayed in the cold wind as Elaine drove down the snow-covered streets. Her thin, serious expression was something of a trademark, but lately she'd been looking even more drawn and irritable than usual. Even the merriment all around her offered her no joy or peace. The sparkling town full of happy faces, the shimmering illusion of silver as she drove past one store after another, she refused to welcome any of it. And when she spoke, her words came out as an angry whisper. God, I hate Christmas. A minivan pulled out in front of her and stopped before moving on again at half the speed limit. Move it, you idiot! She pounded on the horn. Her small nostrils flared and her light brown eyes narrowed. Snow fell like soft white ashes. The trees had all been draped in blinding white veils, courtesy of an earlier storm, and as she passed the busy park, the sweet melody of "O Come All You Faithful" swept through her vehicle. The minivan stopped 10 feet from a green light to allow some shoppers to cross the road. Elaine scowled, her eyes flaring with contempt. You don't stop when the light's green! Before the minivan got to the intersection, the light turned yellow. The minivan stopped. Elaine clenched her teeth and shook her head. Urgh, unbelievable. She checked her watch and pounded the steering wheel. She still had a ton of shopping to do. Janie wanted the newest Umbilical Minds in concert on Blu-ray, plus some new gloves and a pair of earmuffs because all her friends had them. Janie, having just turned 16, spent most of her time watching music videos or poring through fashion magazines, pausing only to say, "This is what I want for my birthday, Mom." Elaine hadn't yet been able to find Time Explorers, the educational astronomy-based computer game that Sam wanted so badly. At barely 7 years old, Sam was more knowledgeable about the solar system than she'd ever been. It's green, people! Move it! Elaine mashed the horn again. Traffic inched ahead. Elaine eased off the brake and let the car move forward. Several shoppers on the curb, their arms full of colorful packages, turned and gave her a collective glare. Elaine rolled down her window. You got a problem? She spit out her gum, and when she turned back to face the road, she had to slam on the brakes. A child, who looked about 10 years old, wearing a bright blue jacket and a yellow hat that hung down the length of his back, had wandered into the road. He carried a huge red stocking full of small presents. Some of them had spilled out onto the snowy pavement. The boy's mother, a stocky character with curly red hair and green Christmas balls dangling from her ears, hurried out and helped him gather up the items. The woman smiled and apologized and chattered on as Elaine sat there staring ahead with a blank expression. The mother and son finally crossed the road, but not before the light turned red again. Elaine hurried across town to the other mall in her small city. She still couldn't find Janie's Blu-ray or Sam's computer game. She drove to the next county, but had no luck finding what she was looking for, so she raced back again. Actually, raced wasn't quite the word. On Christmas Eve, most people were already done shopping. Those who elected to go out motoring did so to look at all the pretty lights, or maybe to inhibit the one woman forced to shop at the very last hour before Christmas. Whatever their motives, every car she got behind drove 10 miles an hour below the speed limit. Elaine had been working 10 hours a day until the day before. Between grocery shopping, phone calls to distant relatives, mailing Christmas cards, and frantically trying to wrap the dozen or so gifts she had managed to buy, time had all but run out. And oh, how she'd caught hell for it. Her husband, Donnie, kept insisting on how much this gift or that one meant to Janie or Sam, as if she didn't know already, as if Janie hadn't driven her crazy over the 5 Umbilical Minds Blu-rays she just had to have, plus the sweater, the gloves, and all the rest of it. Sam wasn't nearly as bad, but that didn't change Elaine's situation at all. Sam still wanted that computer game. It was the only thing he'd really asked for, and at 4 p.m, Elaine hadn't found it yet. As she cut across Main Street via Highwood Boulevard, Elaine passed a bunch of pricey 3-story houses adorned with tiny lights. Some looked alive, burning with twinkling flames of a dozen colors that clung to the walls and railings. Many had gone so far as to set the leafless hardwoods or fluffy evergreens around their houses ablaze in a similar fashion. Elaine glanced around at the bright spectacles and shook her head. Waste of electricity. She went back to arranging her to-do list in her mind. She still had to bake the pies and cookies, finish wrapping at least a dozen other gifts for friends who'd gotten her something, leaving her with a meddling sense of obligation, then toast the stuffing for the turkey. Donnie would be at work until midnight, so she'd have no one to help her with the wrapping, the shopping, the cooking. A blue sedan with its headlights off pulled out from a side street and veered into her lane. "Turn on your damn lights!" Her face felt hot. Beneath her coat, a few beads of sweat ran down her sides. She turned off the heat and cracked the window. In less than a minute, her feet got cold. Elaine hadn't planned her trip very well. After stopping at every store in town and leaving empty-handed, she had to double back to the shopping center in the neighboring town, her last hope. She still had to find the 5th Umbilical Minds Blu-ray, and Elaine just knew that Janie would complain on Christmas morning. Sammy's computer game also remained on her list. Elaine had checked every computer, department, and toy store in 5 counties. That bothered her more than Janie's missing present. At least she'd gotten 4 out of 5 for her daughter. Elaine had bought many other things for Sam, but she wasn't sure he'd like any of them. He would be so polite about not getting what he'd asked for. He'd smile and laugh and act as if he didn't care. Few things made Elaine feel worse than a 7-year-old boy with a better attitude than most adults she knew, including herself. She pulled into the parking lot just as the store lights winked out. It was only 4:30, yet darkness had fallen like a dirty wool blanket. Exhausted and defeated, she wrote off the missing items on her list as unattainable and headed home. Even before opening the door, Elaine heard obnoxious thumping music pushing against the walls. Upon entering the house, ice picks of awful music assaulted her ears. Janie sat in the living room, watching a video with the volume at full blast. Elaine barely made it inside before 3 bags slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor. "Janie, turn that noise down." "What?" "I said." The music's volume dropped by a few decibels. "Chill out, Mom. It's Christmas," Janie called back. Elaine gathered the bags and staggered into the bedroom. She tossed them onto the bed and turned around to find her daughter standing inside the doorway. "Oh, presents for me, presents for me." Janie stood on her tiptoes to peek at what lay on the bed, clapping her hands like a child half her age. Janie got her tall, slender frame and huge blue eyes from Donnie. Her entire face had the same oval shape and subtle features as her father's. She was a beautiful girl, but a pain in the ass sometimes, especially around her birthday and Christmas. "Out!" Elaine pointed at the door. She slipped out of her coat and tried to usher Janie away. "Ooh, that looks like the sweater I asked for." "Here!" Elaine dumped the bags out on the bed in a burst of anger. "Go ahead and look if you want. It's not like it required any thought on my part. Have a look." Most of the gifts were for Donnie and Sam, but a few things for Janie spilled out as well. The unwrapped gifts lay on the bed, the glossy cellophane winking under the light above. Clothes with tags, toys in boxes for Sam, some books, and a few other things formed a messy pile in the center of the mattress. Silence filled the room. Janie's big blue eyes sparkled with tears. Her bottom lip quivered. "Jesus, Mom." She stormed out, clomped up the stairs to her bedroom, and slammed the door. Elaine ran her fingers through her thick brown hair. She heaved a long sigh and closed her eyes. "Nice job, Elaine. Way to go." After taking a few moments to collect herself, Elaine started in on the wrapping. The time she had allotted for the tedious chore did not include time spent searching for the empty boxes in the attic. She worked as fast as she could and spent just under 2 hours wrapping half the gifts before developing a terrible headache. As she took a break to gulp down some aspirin and water, she stared out the kitchen window at the front yard. Snow came down in big feathery flakes and covered everything like a damp washcloth. Yet it failed to conceal the slushy brown mess in the street. A car passed by and splashed filthy muck onto the pristine snowbank, staining it, ruining it. The erratic spikes of whatever music Janie was listening to upstairs became nothing more than background noise. Soft, angelic voices poured out of the TV in the living room as the blinking Christmas tree speckled the walls with illusionary jewels of color. Elaine suddenly realized that she hadn't seen Sammy since she'd gotten home. Moments later, Janie came thumping down the stairs. Elaine caught her before she could duck into the bathroom. "Is Sammy in his room?" Janie stopped. "No, he went to return some books at the library." Elaine glanced at the mat by the door. Sammy's small black boots stood against the wall. "Why didn't he wear his boots?" Janie sighed. "I don't know. It wasn't that bad outside when he left." She looked down at her watch. Her face lost all color. Elaine took a step toward her daughter as panic hit. "The library is only 4 blocks away. How long has he been gone?" Janie's mouth opened and closed. "He's 7 years old, Janie. Where is he?" "I don't know." Before Elaine had the chance to go into full panic mode, she heard the front door close behind her. She turned to find Sammy stomping his small feet on the mat. Bundled up in his green coat with the hood pulled over his head, he struggled to take off his gloves. Elaine walked over to him, both angry and relieved. "Where have you been? It doesn't take that long to go to the library and back." "Yeah, you scared the crap out of me," Janie snapped. Elaine held up a hand to silence her. Janie stomped into the bathroom and slammed the door. Sammy looked up at Elaine. All she could see were his small brown eyes peering at her over the scarf she always made him wear when it was especially cold out. He said something, but the scarf muffled his words. "What? Take off the scarf. I can't hear you." Sammy unraveled his scarf. I went for a walk." Elaine blinked as if she'd been struck in the face. It took her several seconds to recover. "You went for a walk? In this weather? By yourself? What in the name of—" Her gaze wandered down his torso, made bulky from his coat, and settled on his feet. "Are those your new sneakers?" "Look at them! They're ruined!" Sam glanced up at her and dropped his gloves on the mat. "Pick those up. Clip them to the string so they can dry." Elaine crossed her arms and shook her head. "I was about to call the police. What possessed you to go for a walk in that mess out there? And in your new sneakers?" "I don't know." Sam folded back his hood, removed his knit hat, and scratched his head. His hair spiked up in all directions. While Janie had inherited most of her father's features, Sam shared most of Elaine's. His gently upturned nose looked exactly like hers had at the same age. "You don't know?" "Stop. Don't move. Take off those sneakers first." "Ugh, they're going to stink up the house. I just know it. No more nighttime walks in the snow unless someone's with you. You're too young to be making up your own schedule. You hear me?" Sam nodded. Elaine removed his sneakers, soaked and filthy from the slush. She took off his wet socks and his tiny feet were like ice. "How did you get so wet? Your feet are frozen." They were cold, but still healthy. "You're lucky you didn't get frostbite. That's why I make you wear boots. Come here." She gave him 2 light whacks on the bottom. "Ow. Next time I tell you to wear your boots, you listen. Go put on some dry socks before you catch a cold." Sam trotted across the room, his bare feet making slapping sounds on the vinyl floor. He remained bundled up in his thick winter coat, which made him look fat. Vanishing around the corner, he thumped up the stairs before Elaine got the chance to tell him to take it off. After a moment, lacking the strength to call after him, she shook her head and went back to work. Hark the Herald Angels Sing played in the next room while Elaine finished up the pies and prepared to get started on the cookies. She had already thawed the turkey, but she still needed to dice 3 kinds of bread and toast it for her special stuffing. She labored until after 7 when Janie came down to watch Christmas specials. As soon as Elaine had started the pies baking, she stepped into the living room with the intention of smoothing things over. "What are you watching?" Janie ignored her, which stung more than anything she might have said. Elaine returned to the kitchen and washed the dishes. She stared out at the night again as the fluffy snow glided around the amber lamps and collected on the ground. Christmas Eve, and she was alone. Janie wouldn't speak to her, again, and Sam was up in his room, hiding from her. Again. Elaine's nose stung, and a few tears spilled out of her eyes. She gritted her teeth and heard a ripping sound. She looked down at the damp dish rag in her hands. She had torn it in half. Physically and emotionally exhausted, she wandered back to the living room doorway. Janie was watching Scrooge, and Elaine admired her daughter's face in the light from the TV. Janie was still ignoring her, but she didn't look upset, at least not from her expression. She looked more aloof than angry. Janie blinked her wide blue eyes, the long lashes casting shadows on the tops of her high cheeks. For a minute, Elaine pretended that she wasn't such a horrible mother, that if she wanted to, she could go right over and hug Janie, and Janie would let her. A harmless fantasy, but it carried enough weight to make her smile and forget all her problems for a few seconds. The bills, working 2 jobs to get by, the car repairs that had consumed almost half of the Christmas money. Elaine admired the tree, appreciating how lovely it looked. The colored bulbs sparkled and winked like glowing gems. The beautiful display left her mesmerized for a moment or two, until her gaze dropped lower. The small number of gifts surrounding the base yanked her out of her peaceful state. 2 years ago had been much better, before she'd lost her good job and Donnie had been earning better money as a carpenter. They had planned way ahead, and the tree had practically rested on dozens of presents. They had piled them up along the wall and had to place several across the room. That was the only year she could remember giving Janie everything she'd asked for. Sam had never been as hard to please, but he'd been ecstatic. His biggest problem that year had been trying to decide which of the 24 wonderful toys to play with first. In contrast to that bountiful year, no more than 20 presents sat under a small tree. Many of the gifts were cheap items wrapped in larger boxes to make the overall scene look more impressive. Elaine found the idea of being so phony with her own family depressing and inexcusable. Of the few presents under the tree, half of them were strong candidates for a Christmas stocking. She made a mental note to put up the stockings later. Tradition held that they should be filled and hung only after the kids had gone to bed, even though neither of them believed in Santa Claus anymore. At the age of 5, Sam could no longer be taken in by the myth. He'd pointed out that one man could never visit so many houses in a single night. The funny part was how he'd come to the conclusion in the first place. "We went to visit Mrs. Ackerman yesterday, and just look how long she kept you, yakking away about the weather and stuff," he told Elaine. After Elaine had suggested that Santa Claus only visited after people were asleep, he'd said, "It's not nighttime everywhere. Somebody's apt to be awake, and they'd hold him back to talk, just like Mrs. Ackerman." Elaine recalled how she'd scolded him earlier, and the remorse added even more weight to her troubled mind. Sam loved to watch Christmas specials, and he would have been downstairs if Elaine hadn't punished him. To make matters worse, according to their family's strange traditions, Elaine had the dreadful task of informing her children what they shouldn't expect to find under the tree the next morning. The tradition had begun back when Elaine was 4 or 5 to circumvent any embarrassing unpleasantness on Christmas morning. Her older sister Bridget had gone crazy after not receiving a gift she just knew was under the tree somewhere. "Where are my roller skates? Dad, I don't see my roller skates." Bridget behaved as though her entire world had turned to ashes. She went into a horrible crying fit unlike anything Elaine had ever seen before or since. So after battling traffic all day, wrapping gifts, baking pies, and cleaning the kitchen, Elaine had to break the bad news to her kids about what she had failed to buy for them. After the day she'd had, she would almost rather inform someone that their spouse, child, dog, or grandmother had been run over by a fire truck. But that was how it always been done when she was a girl. Elaine's parents had done their best to gather what they could for Christmas and would then explain that no, she wouldn't find the runner sled she'd asked for under the tree, but maybe they could get one later. Elaine's parents had sometimes wrapped a slip of paper, an IOU, in place of the desired gift. Elaine considered the practice a bit on the tacky side and had abandoned that part of the tradition after only one attempt. Janie hadn't been amused in the slightest to receive a piece of paper in place of a camera. Elaine did, however, continue the tradition of apologizing for coming up short and promising to deliver the gift at some later date, normally a few months after Christmas, when people weren't out trying to buy up everything in sight. She had failed to get Janie's earmuffs, the stylish leather gloves her daughter had seen some supermodel wearing, a pair of designer jeans she had just had to have, and of course the Blu-ray. Elaine had intended to start with Janie simply because she felt it best to do the hardest part first. But watching Janie on the couch, smiling at the TV as several children pulled Albert Finney, dressed as Father Christmas, in a sled down a snow-covered street, she decided to break the news to Sammy first. She'd only failed to get one thing for him. Of course, he'd only really asked for that one thing, so... Procrastinating a moment longer, Elaine enjoyed a few notes of Janie's trademark laughter before she took a deep breath, crept through the living room, and ascended the stairs. Standing outside Sam's bedroom, Elaine heard Christmas carols playing on his small radio. She pressed an ear to the door and listened to him singing along with the little drummer boy. His high-pitched choir boy voice made her smile. Sometimes she swore that Sam had already passed Janie on the maturity scale. Elaine leaned her head against Sam's door. He had such a beautiful voice. It made her heart ache all of a sudden. She cupped a hand over her mouth and a few tears escaped as she squeezed her eyes closed. She touched the door with her right hand, resting it there as she cried. She worried that her presence might ruin the song, so she waited. Sammy's little voice felt like the empathetic fingers of something divine and pure, with all of the power to gently stroke away the pain, the fear, the guilt. She swallowed the salty film in her throat and balanced her emotions on her head as she'd done countless times before. She muttered a silent prayer before reaching for the doorknob, pausing just long enough to enjoy the end of the song. As soon as she opened the door, Sam spun around and stood with his back to the bed. He looked shocked and surprised, and for a second, Elaine forgot why she'd come to see him in the first place. "Hey, kid," she said. Hi, Mom. Sam offered a tiny, nervous smile. Elaine looked at the walls of his neat room, plastered with posters of outer space and wild animals. Sammy, remember the computer game you asked for? He nodded. Well, I couldn't find it. I'm sorry, but I'll bet we can find it later, after the holidays, okay? Sam nodded and smiled again as if it were no big deal, just as she thought he would. The failure bothered her nonetheless. Elaine started toward him, and Sam backed against the bed. Elaine stopped. I'm sorry about before, okay? I worry a lot about you and Janie, more than you know. Sam nodded and looked down at the floor. And walking around in the slush like that isn't healthy. Your feet were like ice. Are they okay now? Sam kept his head lowered. Elaine noticed that he was standing in an awkward position. His arms were pressed to his sides, his hands hidden behind his back. Sam? Honey, what's behind your back? Nothing. Sammy, what is it? You can tell me. Sam looked up at her with that small face so much like hers when she'd been a little girl. Elaine was overcome by a strange sensation, as if she were her own mother, speaking to herself about this or that. She momentarily forgot everything as she saw herself sitting on the bed as a child, facing her mother, who said in a stern voice, Remember what I said, Elaine. I love you, but you have to listen. Mom, are you okay? Sam asked. Elaine sniffled and blinked back her tears. I'm fine. She wiped her eyes, then remembered what she'd asked him. What have you got, honey? Sam looked pensive. Promise you won't be mad? It's not a wounded squirrel or a bird, is it? No more wild animals, sweetie. Remember what we said? We can't keep it, whatever it is. Sam shook his head. No, it's not, but... He looked away. You might be mad, and I don't want you to be mad anymore. Elaine sighed through a genuine smile. I won't be. Promise. What is it? Come closer. I'll show you, he whispered. Elaine knelt at his feet. She brushed his warm neck with her fingers. You're so beautiful. Do you know that? Her eyes filled up again and started leaking. Sam looked at her, his face wrinkled with confusion. What's wrong, Mom? He touched her cheek. Nothing, I'm fine. She kissed his hand. Oh, well, this will make you happy. If you're sad, I mean. Don't be mad, okay? Guilt stung Elaine when she felt him shaking. I won't be, promise. Sam brought his hands out from behind his back to reveal a cream-colored sweater with pearl buttons. It's for you, for Christmas. It will keep you warm. Do you like it? Elaine felt the fabric between her fingers. The price tag had been torn off, but the word sale remained. I was going to try and wrap it, but I think you can have it now, to cheer you up. Are you mad? Elaine tried to figure out where it had come from. The tag didn't say, so she asked him. I got it for you today. That's where I went, to Filson's. Are you mad? Don't be mad, okay? I wanted it to be a surprise, but Dad's working late again, and tomorrow's Christmas. I saw it there before, but I didn't have my money. Dad said you might like it. Do you? Are you mad? Elaine trembled in shock. Filson's department store was at least 2 miles from the house, each way. She silently thanked God that Sammy hadn't been injured or kidnapped. Being mad never crossed her mind. Disbelief, shame for her behavior, and sorrow for not deserving such a beautiful child clashed inside her. Elaine again saw herself crying while she sat on the bed before her scolding mother. She nodded her consent to what her mother said before running to her side. Elaine hugged her mother around the legs, desperately clinging to her. Her mother felt very stiff as she placed a hand on Elaine's head and pushed her away. I can take it back if you don't like it. Sam blinked at her. Elaine laughed. No, sweetie. It's beautiful. It's overwhelming. She took Sam into her arms, and her emotions spilled over and poured out of her. She cried on his small shoulder, and the simple act of embracing him felt both calming and cleansing. Elaine guessed that Sam wasn't sure how to react. After a short while, his arms fell across her back. He kissed her head and leaned against her. She heard him give a little sigh of relief. Honey, it's the most wonderful thing anyone's ever given to me, ever. Elaine squeezed him tight as she sniffled and laughed, then pulled him back to look at him. Sam smiled. clearly delighted that his 4+ mile trek had not been in vain. He looked confused about the tears streaming down Elaine's face and wiped them away. Are you sad? No, honey. I feel better than I have in years. She pressed him against her again. Then why are you crying? Elaine pulled back to study his small face. She told him how similar their features were, how he looked a lot like she had at his age. She'd never told Sammy that before, and he reacted with amazement. I'm not sad, not anymore, she said. It's just, when your father and I decided to have you and your sister, we wanted to give you both the world. And it's frustrating sometimes, knowing we can only afford to give you a 50-foot lot. She gave him a faint smile. Sam draped the sleeves of the sweater over her shoulders. Elaine composed herself before speaking again. I have to talk to Janie. There are some things I couldn't get her. Sam shook his head. She won't care. Elaine touched his silky hair and marveled at his fragile beauty. Why do you say that? Remember when my class went to Janie's school for the play? Elaine nodded. Well, I snuck into the cafeteria when she was having lunch, and I heard her bragging about you to all her friends. Elaine's eyes widened. What? She said she had the best mom in town, maybe even the state, because you let her swear in front of you sometimes, and you buy her cool clothes, and you took her to that Umbilical Head concert last year. Janie had never said anything like that to Elaine. And none of her friends argued. Most of them agreed with Janie, so I don't think she'll be too upset about what you couldn't get her. She'll understand. Elaine's gaze wandered around the room as Sam patted her softly on the head and played with her hair. Do you feel better now? He asked. Elaine smiled and scooped him up into her arms. She pressed his head to her neck and kissed his ear. Sam giggled. Yes, I feel much better. She started out the door. Sam pulled back to look her in the eyes. Where are we going? I'm never letting go of you. Sam giggled again when she kissed his neck. Are you going to carry me to school when I go back? Yep. Where are you taking me now? Downstairs so I can talk to your sister. Elaine wrapped her new sweater around Sammy and smothered him with affection all the way down the stairs.